So we'll just get started with recording the webinar. Right, so good morning and good afternoon, depending where you're calling at for today's webinar. This is the free webinar hosted by Circular Business Association, titled Circular Economy, Isn't It Just Better Waste Management? Now, I'd like to start with asking our audience, and you don't have to tell me the answer, but it's something to help you get started into this webinar. Now, how many of you actually believe that if we wanted to see a sunrise, we can actually get there with some people pulling west and some people pulling east? Now, if we're all in that boat, it's probably pretty difficult to row. How about this? How many of you have actually heard about circular economy, but it actually seems much the same as better recycling or waste management? Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Legion, and I am the chairperson of Circular Business Association. For those of you who don't know me, I actually came from a background of environmental sciences, mainly trained in ecology, and then later on pursued environmental economics and sort of found the circular economy in that journey after working with the public policy sector for a good sort of 10 years before now transitioning into working more into the business realm. Now, I'm very happy to have with me today Ms. Nicola Evans, as well as Mr. Mike Liao, to actually discuss this topic with me, because this topic was really inspired by a number of conversations that we've been having over the past months. And we started to realize more and more, much to our shock, that this term circular economy is increasingly being almost diluted or even hijacked. And the understanding of this terminology is very important for us to actually move in the same direction. So if you can imagine us being on a boat trying to see the sunrise, we actually do need to be sort of pulling in this similar direction in order to get there as fast as possible. Now, just to give you all a bit of a background of Circular Business Association, the association actually has a big why of solving the climate crisis and creating a livable world by accelerating business transition into the circular economy. And this really stemmed from our subcommittee's passion, and each of us are business owners of our own, that if we don't actually cut emissions in the next decade, which is actually by 2030, then this situation is going to lock us into many generations of very harsh climate situations. And if you can imagine those extreme weather conditions that we've witnessed, especially hard in the last 2 or 3 years, with various types of forest fires, floods, droughts, diseases emerging, crop failures, locusts of like populations exploding, etc., then you can only imagine that when this window closes on this 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, then we are actually going to be locking ourselves into a very harsh system. Now, the warning is actually pretty clear because the science actually tells us that we don't have that much of a runway before the situation becomes reality. And yet, it's not because we don't have the money, we don't have the technical know-how, there are no solutions out there. The main warning that was actually issued by the International Panel on Climate Change in their synthesis report as of last year, March, was that it's actually the pace and the scale of climate action that's insufficient to tackle climate change. I really want you to let that sink in for a bit. It's not that we actually don't know all of this, but it's actually just the pace and the scale of our action that is missing. So Circular Business Association, basically what we do is that we're trying to answer this question of who, when we know of, various governments, economic regions, private companies, even financial institutions, and other organizations issuing the climate commitments and sustainability commitments. But when it comes to who can deliver it on the ground, there's still a big implementation gap and a major headache for these end clients to actually make that transition. What we find is that whatever green products or solutions that are available today is very much in a soup of solutions that these end clients need to wade themselves through and figure out themselves how to align these different vendors and suppliers to solve the problem in totality. So we are actually working on building up a profitable circular economic ecosystem that ties together various ecosystem players, not only those involved in the recovery and repurposing, where a lot of people think circular economy is just about recycling, but it's wider than that. There's also people in the raw materials sectors, the manufacturers, the quality and compliance, the distributors, service providers, even end users and fan base themselves, as well as investors, talents, product designers, logistics and delivery, technology providers, as well as regulators. So what we see is that there are only 5 main things that end clients really need to do so that they can get that pace and that scale for the sustainability actions and climate commitments. And what we want to do is start aligning all these different talents and providers, vendors, suppliers, so that when these companies are making that journey into sustainability and circular economy, we can actually help accelerate that process by bringing together the right people at the right time to solve the right problems. Now, our challenge and the goal of the association is to rapidly replace out all linear economy products with circular economy products in the next 7 to 8 years. But we won't be able to get there with an increasingly diluted and misdirected understanding of the circular economy. Which brings us back to the inspiration from today's topic. I specifically remember a conversation that I was having with somebody who was very curious about the circular economy. But when they did a Google search or even a Bing search or even Yahoo search, these images of circular economy were the predominant finds that they could see. And what is often mentioned or not mentioned in this case is that real emphasis on the design part of circular economy. It seems like a lot of it is in the material cycling. And when we start looking even into market estimations of how big the circular economy will be by 2030, you get estimations such as 533 billion as of 2023 with a great growth rate of 13.19%. But that sort of leads us to an estimation of only about 1.3 trillion US dollars by 2030. And we start looking into the definition of how they look at that market, it's not surprising to see that. Now, when we start looking into the estimation that was done with the wider understanding of what circular economy is, the estimation is actually up at to 4.1 trillion euros, which is quite a bit more than the 1.3 trillion US dollars that people were talking about. And that's why I think we're very blessed to actually have 2 panel speakers with us today, really engage in this conversation to understand better what is actually the circular economy and is it actually just better waste management? So with that, I'd like to call on the first speaker, Miss Nicola Evans. So Miss Nicola actually completed her time with Ellen MacArthur Foundation quite recently, and she was very much involved in the communications and marketing part of the association. She comes with a great background in terms of her involvement with communications. She's been involved with a number of big events, including that in Hong Kong, where actually I think it sparked her inspiration to start pursuing the circular economy. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor over to Nicola. Nicola, you have the floor.
Hi, Lujin. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining today. It's a real honor to be here to talk about something I believe so passionately in. So let me just share my screen and I'll dive right in. So is a circular economy just better waste management? Well, it does include waste management, but it's an awful lot more than that. Let's start off by considering what is waste. And if you could just take a couple of seconds to think about what is waste? Where does it exist? And if you really reflect on it, there is no waste in nature. This is a human-made problem. We can see trees like this beautiful autumnal tree lose its leaves. Is that waste? Well, not really, because it becomes food for the immediate ecosystem. And that's the way nature is created. There is no such thing as waste. So when we look at waste management, the reason it's not part of a circular economy, and not in the sense that we're talking today, is because what it's doing is taking the sort of the excess and the byproducts of things we've created and kind of forgetting about them and giving it to somebody else to sort out. Now, the circular economy is never about let's give it to somebody else to sort out. It's always about how do we design from the very beginning products and services that eliminate waste. And so that intention right at the start, as Legion was talking about, the missing piece in a lot of the diagrams that you see on the web, is that the design piece is missing. So the circular economy is all about how do we design products with the end of life in mind, and how do we make that end of life as far away as possible. So we look at all sorts of different business models and uses of these products. And then right at the end, when it really has finished its life, how do we safely return the materials back into the environment? So whilst waste management does deal with an existing problem that we have, it's not the solution. It's not going to fix the big issue. And so we need to look at, well, what is the solution? Okay, so just quickly on the problem of not understanding it for what it really is. So if we think the circular economy is only about waste management or only about recycling, then we're going to create systems and design things to optimize just for that. And therefore, we're going to go much slower, and we're not going to get the sustainable end result that we actually urgently need. So let's have a look at what the linear economy is. Again, Legion touched on this in the opening. It's called take, make, waste, or take, make, dispose, because it's understood as a straight line. You take things from the earth, you make things, you use them, and then you throw them away. It's just a line. Materials start here, become products and services, and end up in landfill or incinerated or whatever it's doing to damage the environment. And then traditionally, sustainability has been to say, well, let's follow that same line, but let's just do it less bad. So let's take less, let's make less, let's use less, and let's waste less. And that's fine in terms of slowing the problem down. We can look at efficiencies and how do we use things better. It does less harm. We probably would consider that recycling more might help. Let's clean up the beaches and clean up the rivers. But ultimately, it's still the same economic model, and that is the root of the problem. And this buys us time. It's not a long-term solution. Imagine yourself in a car veering towards the end of a cliff. Sustainability traditionally has been, let's slow the car down, but ultimately it's still going to be flying off the cliff. So how do we get that car to turn around? So the circular economy is a complete rethink and redesign of the whole system. We're looking at new business models, new innovation, a thorough design-led approach. There's a lot of intention here on how we build an economy on 3 principles, and that's to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials for as long as possible, and regenerate nature. And the regenerate nature piece is a really, really critical part of the circular economy. It's often missed, but what we're trying to do here is ensure that we do more good, not just less harm, and we leave the planet in a better place. We can only live within the constraints of this one planet, so let's leave it in a better place for generations to come. Now, within that circle, you'll see different words, and they're listed in priority, actually, of highest value. So we want to share things, we want to reuse things, we want to repair them, remanufacture them, refurbish them, and then right at the end, recycling of what's left. And all of that is done by design. It's a really, really critical part of this. And this economic model is designed to be a truly sustainable long-term solution. It's designed to be one that helps people and planet. But why do we need to change our current economic model? Well, we've got finite resources, we've got a growing population, and we've got a more prosperous population. People are getting wealthier, and when they get wealthier, they place more demands. They want more things, they want bigger houses, etc., etc. The earth can only deliver so much, so we've got a problem. We've also got an issue that we have a lot of valuable resources that are thrown away, often after no use or one use, which is a terrible situation to be in. You've also got valuable resources hidden within products that get thrown away. So there's more gold ore in 1 ton of mobile phones than in there's more gold in 1 ton of mobile phones than 1 ton of gold ore. We need to get those valuable resources back. And then there's also this constant extraction of virgin materials. And that extractive need is very damaging. It's damaging to people, damaging to health, communities, damaging to the environment. It's a broken model, and we need to not be doing that. So that linear economic model of take, make, waste is responsible for some of these crises, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and plastic pollution. And then on that climate change piece, to connect to what Lee Jin was saying at the beginning about the climate crisis, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2019 did a study called Completing the Picture, and it revealed that 55% of our carbon emissions can be tackled by that transition to renewable energy, but there's 45% of carbon emissions that require a different approach to the way we make and use products and our food system. And that is where the circular economy plays an incredibly critical role. So we need to keep things in use for as long as possible at their highest value. So for example, if you buy a pair of jeans, we need to keep those jeans as jeans for as long as possible. If you buy a car, we want to keep that car as a car for as long as possible. And we can do that through sharing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and remanufacturing. And we need to protect, restore, and regenerate our natural environment by circulating nutrients, eliminating toxic chemicals, and transitioning to renewable energy. So I'm going to end today with a video that just highlights the connection to climate change in just 2 minutes. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to the Q&A later. Thanks, Lee Jin.
Climate change is a result of our take, make, waste economy. And until now, we've looked at solving climate change largely by switching to renewable energy. We're replacing fossil fuels with wind and solar power at speed all over the world. But the truth is that the energy transition will only solve half the climate problem. It's like we've been reading only half the book, like we've been watching only half the movie. So what completes the picture? Transforming how industry uses materials and how we manage land. That is, transitioning to a circular economy. It's more than energy. It's about transformation. What does that mean? It means we address things before they become a problem and design out emissions before production even begins. We build an economy that eliminates waste and pollution, keeps products and materials in use, and regenerates natural systems. The circular economy can help address climate change by reducing emissions from industry, land use, and agriculture. So how do we make this transition? By businesses embedding the circular economy in their climate strategies and redesigning products and services. By governments setting enabling policies and putting the necessary infrastructure in place. By investors mobilizing capital towards circular economy solutions.
The circular economy plays a really key role in solving many of the problems around climate change. But what it also does is it builds a more resilient economy.
A complete picture of a thriving, zero-emissions economy is coming into focus. The mission now is to make it a reality.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for that session. And I really like that sort of analogy that you use to say that, if you imagine a car going towards a cliff, the traditional way that we've been approaching sustainability has been to say that we will slow down the car from getting to the cliff, whereas the circular economy is talking about how to actually turn the whole car around and not be headed to that cliff. I really love that analogy from that. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor over to Mike, who actually is from Terra Phoenix, and he is the commercial director for Terra Phoenix. And presenting to us today, he would love to be able to share how the company is actually enabling us to understand waste streams much better, so that we can actually bring it back, right from the beginning. Say, before it even happens, what can we do with it? So Mike actually comes from a big background from the IT sector. He's currently based in Singapore. And Mike, I'll pass the floor over now to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Li. I'll get this one set up. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Liao. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Phoenix.
Sorry, Mike, I think you're a bit soft. Do you mind speaking a bit louder? Yep.
Sure. Is this better?
Still a bit soft,
Still
maybe.
very soft.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to speak as loud as I can. Okay. So basically on these slides, I try to illustrate that all of us are actually staying in a very clean urban neighborhood most of the time, where our rubbish and waste will be taken away once we place them outside in the rubbish bin. Most of us are also aware that the rubbish and waste will be taken to a landfill and incinerator, but only a few of us are actually aware what are the problems of this entire process, especially when we are doing the very same old thing since for the past 40, 50, 120 years. Globally, most countries practice a system that has to be made obsolete by now. Basically, we are paying the contractor to collect from our houses to the landfill and incinerator. The more that they haul from our home to the landfill and incinerator, the more they get paid. That is not right. So the questions that we need to ask ourselves are we paying for a future problem? So the challenge that everyone in our organizations or Phoenix are so passionate to bring about, to solve, are hitting every one of us very closely. There are 8 billion people in the world today, and the waste that we generated daily will stay on and accumulate on Earth over time. If you take the amount of waste for the past 120 years and distribute them across the Earth, you will realize there are more waste than human in every square meter of our land surface. Not to mention the toxin, the air, water contaminations. Very soon, we'll run out of space for humans to live on. And we need to do something about it, like what Nicola and Eugene said. It's like yesterday. So in 2019, China announced a mandatory waste separation act. Basically, Shanghai was one of the cities to kickstart this entire test run, followed by the 46 other cities in China. And Shaoxing today is one of the cities among them all to achieve a zero waste status. The act actually required a mandatory separations at source, where the household waste must be accompanied with a front-end service, meaning that they must be separated at the front end so that it can be processed and treated at the back end. Food waste, as most of us are aware, are among the largest portion of domestic waste, and it can be reduced immediately if we implement and put in the act. According to Shanghai City Management and Administrative Execution Bureau, in 2019, Shanghai City collected 4,050 tons of recyclable per day. Only 0.6 tons are hazardous waste, and there are additional 7,500 tons of household food waste. Those are the scales that we are looking at. What we're going to do about it. Globally, of course, countries like Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Croatia, Nepal, Australia, and so forth, they are also doing likewise, enacting mandatory waste separation act.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yep,
Yep.
sorry. I think some of our attendees are finding it difficult to actually hear you clearly. Perhaps you can remove your headset and use your computer's mic directly.
Sure. Let's try that.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. Yeah, please give Mike a few moments just now. I think we did manage.
Better?
Yep, it's a bit clearer. Yep, please continue.
Okay, good. Okay. So Phoenix is an IT company. We operate in a waste management domain, meaning our core strengths are in tracking, recording, monitoring, reporting, analyzing all the waste collection data from the source all the way to the recycling point. And yes, we are not just doing the IT part of it, we still move the waste. and recycle them as much as possible, just like any other waste company. But we are an IT company. But what sets us apart are the big data, to know how to marry the IT and the hardware together so that we can actualize this entire process. With the big data that we collected, we are able to employ a series of strategies from our arsenal to refine the response based on the response of the data. This will allow us to do targeted campaign, like instigating behavioral change, like what Nicola said. We need to do something, but how can we instigate that change that will generate less wastage, more upcycling, better design, better supply chain, and to slow down the entire impact of our environment, and at the same time, we steer away from generating the waste. So in these slides, basically, we are strong advocates of sustainable waste management, and we believe that it is equally important to produce goods in a more responsible manner as in treating the waste later on. In the typical supply chain, manufacturers are only concerned about turning raw material into products in the most cost-effective manner, and consumer will dispose of this product at the end of life cycle. As Nicola has pointed out, as the economy getting better, life getting better, we need bigger house, better phone. We in fact change it like 14 months. These basically are things that we need to change. We need to re-examine the entire supply chain to enhance them. First, to decrease the overall impact to our environment. 2, to conserve our resources. 3, to ensure manufacturers are producing things in a responsible manner with sustainable production and consumption life cycle. As the technology required are readily available, and we could develop the processes together with the stakeholder, then we have an economic system that will produce growth investment opportunity that could contribute to the GDP. An example of such approach to mitigate overproduction issue is the extended producer responsibility, EPR, which capped new production over a ratio of collected waste product by the same manufacturer. For example, when you buy a fridge, we require the manufacturer to take back the packaging, which we all normally throw away, to collect it, reuse it, and also at the end of the life cycle of that refrigerator, they will have to take it back, tear it down, reproduce it, and extract what they can from it and reproduce new material or new product from it. Now, let's shift gear a bit. In order to achieve this effective resource recycling and sustainable economic development, we have to look at the entire thing in the totality. The structure of the circular economy aims to achieve the maximum possible reuse of material. This means that the primary industry becomes green, represented by the circular arrow. Then the same green practices are cascaded to the secondary industry and the tertiary industry and so forth. Only in this manner, it can combine the primary industry and then to reduce the overall emission of the entire industry as a whole. This approach may have many benefits. The first benefit is that raw material do not need to rely solely on new extractions, but we prioritize the use of already used waste and resources. Therefore, we solve the problem of excessive reliance on primary industry, such as our natural resources. The second benefit is that we try to reduce the emission as much as possible. We actually accumulate more carbon storage. That is for layer 2. Similarly, in the service sector, it is also an economic practice. That is to say, when the volume of services can be fairly evaluated and recognized, or when there is a relative complete evaluation model, it actually becomes a generator of economy itself. In addition, there are communities. The constructions of communities and the maintenance of civilized town, including the effective integrations of resources, actually represents the ability to better create a larger economic scale. Finally, is the economic system itself. Compared to the linear system, the current economic system is actually the superior. more superior because it uses a more diverse way to create money and currency. So also, we need to bear in mind that not all circular economy are the same, especially in waste treatment. So we do not want a circular chain illustrated on the left, where the waste is used primarily to generate more energy, which contribute to more byproducts like air pollution, dioxin, furands, PCB, PAH, all these contaminants, because of the reliance of cheaper alternative electric energy. And therefore, more incinerators are built and even importing waste from foreign countries as fuel for this incinerator. What we are aiming is actually on the right, working on, from the onstart, cutting down the waste generation, instigating behavioral change through education and awareness, promoting sustainable and responsible production and consumption, and pushing the innovation in keeping material and product in use at optimal level to improve the social economy. So I will go very quickly on these next few slides. Basically, it's an example of how we actually do it. It's through a mechanic we call waste life cycle analysis. We know that it is a wicked problem. It cannot be addressed by one individual, one company, or even one country. It is a highly complex problem with unclear solutions. What we have to do is we have to look at it from a system-based perspective, and it requires all the stakeholders from the entire ecosystem to come together. The manufacturers, the suppliers, the transporter, the logistics, the consumer, everyone has to play their part. As you notice, I keep the awareness and participation part very, very simple, just by a few blocks. But the mechanism within is anything but simple, where it requires generations and generations of educations. We need policy changes. We need the readiness of technology and etc. to make the entire thing work. Very briefly, of course, coming from a private industry, I'll just basically say that TerraPhoenix is a very small startup. We are just valued at 50 million RMB, and our CEO, Professor Dr. Tan Jin Seong, has a small team of 100 odd specialists. We share the same passion as him on marrying IT, AI, waste management, and also education part to make the change. Through these sessions, we want to set ourselves up for more innovation change. And lastly, this is a overall chart to show where our competitiveness edge lies. We are strong in technical, we work on the market strength, we file patents to protect the work that we've done. So with that, I'd like to end my presentations and look forward for the discussions later. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike, for that sharing. I think like there's a few golden nuggets there, which I think I'd love to actually tease more out during the Q&A session, which we have actually arrived to. And I really like that part where you are talking about, the big data that's collected enables you to actually target those campaigns that can instigate behavioral changes. Because it always seems like when we're talking about the traditional sustainability realm, it's very much driven by this emotion of guilt, that we have to actually feel bad for using all of this stuff. And I mean, it's almost set up right as the linear economy enables consumers to behave in that way, that we just throw away stuff, and then at the most we feel guilty about it. So it would be very interesting to actually learn more about this instigated behavioral change that works with how communities actually function, also what human behaviors you are looking at changing through your models, etc. With that, I think I'd like to sort of start our Q&A session, whereby I'd really like to start off first with this question, probably starting with Nicola, whereby, why would this sort of like distorted understanding of circular economy actually bring us further away from sustainability? I know you touched on it briefly in your presentation, but maybe you could use some examples or something to help us in the audience understand it a little bit better.
I think the big risk of not understanding it for what it really is that we know that it's a solution, and a lot of people think it's the solution to the big climate crises. But if it's not actually understood for being an economy that is designed with the intention of the right outcomes, and that design piece is something that happens very early on, then actually we're still going to get trapped in trying to fix. How do I explain this? We're going to imagine a bathtub, right? And the tap's on, the plug's in, and it's overflowing. And if all we think we need to do is get a bucket and keep emptying the water out, with the tap still on, we've still got a problem. We've still got too much stuff coming in, and we're saying, well, it's all right because the bucket's going to fix the problem. Well, it's not, because we haven't fixed the issue, which is the tap's still on. How do we redesign the system so that there's no more coming in? And we have to spend more time really carefully designing with end of life in mind, coming up with innovative new technology, coming up with new partnerships, embracing business models that really focus on those inner circles of a circular economy, the reuse, the sharing, the repair. How do we encourage more of that rather than, well, it's okay because everything will be recycled? And everything being recycled is a hugely problematic end result, because it means we're not changing anything up front. All we're doing is trying to sort out how we clean up the waste afterwards. But we can't recycle our way out of this. Like, the problem is overwhelmingly big, and no amount of recycling will fix this problem. So we've got to look at how do we embed those new business models, or some of them are old business models, but with new technology, to really fast track those solutions. And I think I was just looking at one actually before we joined. It's called Algramo. They're based in Chile, and they are leading a sort of refill reuse revolution of their own. I think they've got, it's now in Chile, Indonesia, and the US. And they're using an app that you can have on your phone. It's connected to some sort of smart tech in the packaging itself. It's all connected up so that you've got credit, and you don't have to take any money with you, and you can refill that product. It's primarily cleaning products. And you can go in, and it knows that it's your packaging. It knows what you want. It knows how much of it you want. It refills it up, and the app deals with all the payment and everything. Super, brilliant, simple. Doesn't ask a lot of us. You're still going to the shop anyway, but instead of buying a new one and chucking the old one into recycling bin, you take the packaging back, you refill it, and the system all behind the scenes is set up for you. It's brilliant. And then there's other business models. I often talk about Levi's, because I think Levi's is a fantastic one, both from a marketing point of view, where they've done a brilliantly creative campaign around their buy better, wear longer range of jeans. But behind that is a fully comprehensive circular strategy, looking at all the inputs, how the cotton is grown, how the jeans are designed, moving away from fashion cycles and creating timeless jeans, so that you don't feel that need to update them every few months, weeks. I mean, some of these fast fashion companies are becoming single use because people literally wear them once and chuck them away. We have enough clothing on this planet for 6 generations of people. 6 generations of people. Your great grandchildren could still be clothed in what we have today. That is wrong. And so we have to look at the business models that keep things in use, not just how we deal with the problem at the other end. So it's a long answer, but I hope I captured some of it.
Thanks very much, Nicola. And I'd just love to add a little bit in terms of the example you raised about Algramo. And I had the privilege actually having a conversation with one of their people who are in the initial group, and they were saying that the beauty of it was that they didn't have to even try to solve it for circular economy. It was just that the circular economy model actually worked the best for what they were trying to achieve. And what they were actually started out with was really to create this solution to poverty tax, whereby if you're buying things in much smaller sachets, I'm sure most of us have actually experienced that before with like ketchup sachets or shampoo sachets. that when they actually were trying to solve it, they were trying to solve that poverty tax, and that refill model just somehow worked much better. And as a sort of like unintended consequences, they removed that sachet packaging, and therefore reduce that type of plastic pollution that was going into waterways and oceans and things like that. So it's quite amazing that, you know, although circular economy, everyone thinks it's an environmental thing, but actually it's very much related to the social fabrics and the social relationships that we have in that economy itself. And this is probably a great time actually to divert the conversation over to Mike. And maybe you can share your thoughts a little bit about that question initially about why would that misunderstanding actually leave us further away from sustainability, but also maybe some points in relation to how that circular economy actually is turning that relationship of between people actually to materials and also to economy itself. Mike?
Okay, so basically the way that most of us have actually heard about is consumer is the king. So oftentimes when we talk to the manufacturer part, the producer part, they say, well, we just produce what the consumer wants. So I think a lot of things actually start from the consumer side. If we can basically start from the consumer through educations, through proper support and understanding, they have a better way to think that, hey, actually, like Nicholas said, hey, it doesn't matter. A jeans is a jeans, you know, it doesn't matter. There's no design, there's no fashion to it. And then the other thing that we talked about is basically, I always wonder, when we buy a car, when we buy something fancy, it doesn't come with a packaging. It doesn't come in a styrofoam box. It doesn't come in a carton. So, but when we buy a phone, it comes in these fancy boxes, and it comes with a lot of brochures and all these containers and whatnot that oftentimes you just chuck it away. So why do we even need that? Those stuff? It's basically the consumer needs it, the consumer wants it. They feel that they feel, you know, it's more privileged. It's something very fancy. So those are some of the things that we can basically shatter or shine a brighter light to say that, do you really need it? What does it make it? Can I present it to you and then have it back, take it back, and then reuse it for another consumer? So those are some of the things that we can think about and basically to basically rethink. Is it something that we overdo, or is it something that we can change, or what do we actually require? So those are just some thoughts for yeah.
And
Some
Mike, just to sort of like pick up on that point that you mentioned there, I think there's also this sort of like misconception that when we talk about consumer, we're just talking about us as an individual consumer, right? So like our jeans, our phone. But at the same time, we tend to also forget that as businesses, as organizations, we are also consumers as well.
Right.
And very often, even the scale is even huger. Like you were talking about like phones and stuff, just thinking about all those office phones that, you know, that you equip your entire sales team with or your whole colleagues with, and each of them come in the packaging, and very often as a company you'll be like, oh, I can't deal with all of this. So they're starting to see also some companies that's emerging to say that what if we could actually supply either phones or desktops, laptops, and things like that are of these bigger orders and things like that directly without necessarily needing all that packaging, and instead of just selling it to this end client who then has the headache of where to dispose it after, could we actually have a somehow sort of like a service model thinking? Is that right?
Yes, yes. So basically, when I talk about consumer, it's basically the manufacturer can be a consumer as well, because they are buying raw materials and all that. Does it need to come in a container or special packaging or something like that? Or it can be in a simpler form. So every stakeholders within the entire supply chain is a consumer. Buying back the raw material, the recycled material, they are also the consumer. So I just use the word consumer in a very metaphorical way. So yeah, it's actually translating to multiple. As long as the party are purchasing something, we need to really question, is it something necessary? Can we do it differently? Or can we do away without it even?
I really like that sort of sort of description that I've given there, Mike. And I have this picture actually, just that our association also tries to help to communicate to people that as like end consumers, be it as a manufacturer who's consuming something, or maybe an end product like us as individual consumers. At the end of the day, when we look at that as consumer role, we actually have very little control about the types of pollutions that's going to emerge from our consumption, because a lot of those decisions was made by another party further upstream of whatever it is that we're using, be it the product or the service providers that's providing the services, or the ones that are actually producing that part or that component or that material, or even the raw material choices right from the beginning. Do we actually need to use that type of material in order to create the performance that we need for what we want? And all of that actually is sort of like, it builds up as a system to lock in actually some degree of waste for consumers. And that's why there's a lot of sort of, in a way, it's both shocking that consumers as individuals and can't actually do that much, but it's also very liberating to realize that each of us as a consumer of something within our individual or corporation realm, we can actually have a lot more flexibility to explore what can be done in the upstream parts and influence that from our own spheres of influence. Maybe that'd be a great time to actually hear from Nicola as well, some of your thoughts in relation to this, and in particular, sort of like looking at, if it's more than a waste sector thing, what is there still a role for the waste sector to actually exist?
Before I come to that, I'll just talk about that consumption and consumer piece. And MacArthur Foundation, and I'm glad Mike opened up what a consumer was to more than just how we typically understand it. Because at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a couple of things are happening around the word consumer and consumer behavior. One is the foundation believes that is too slow an approach. To try and educate consumers to make better choices is going to take too long. And what we want, imagine this vision that you walk into a supermarket and there are no bad choices. Everything is good. Everything is regenerative. Everything you buy is doing better for the planet. That is the ultimate vision, where it's not on us to go into our supermarket and have to guide the decision of, as you say, people so far out of our control. It shouldn't even be a question. They should be responsible for that. Those businesses, those designers, the marketeers, they should all be responsible for making sure that what ends up in
as
our
a choice, yeah,
no longer a choice.
it's no longer a choice. Yeah, so it's built in actually.
It's in. Everything's good. Everything's good. Every consumer choice I make is doing better for the planet. So that's one thing. That's the sort of the vision of it. But that means you've got to get businesses behind it. You've got to get policy behind it. Policy has to level the playing field for companies. Otherwise, if you try and be a front runner, you might get disadvantaged in some shape or form through higher costs or attacks on by greenwashing and all this sort of other stuff. We need the playing field level. So that's one thing. Oh,
sorry,
yes.
Nicola, I have a question actually, just being a devil's advocate on that particular point that you raised there. It's like a lot of people would think that if a circular economy is so much more better for the world, and the business model should actually already make sense, then shouldn't it actually be profitable as is? Why would you require policy intervention to come in? Or why would you, like for our association, we always get asked, why would you even need like an ecosystem solution to come in if by default, supposedly a circular economy is meant to make more sense?
Well, it makes more sense. You've got the issue that none of the pricing currently builds in the cost of the problem. So if I'm packaging stuff in plastic, sachets, the worst, not recyclable, not manageable, can't do anything with them. If I'm using that and it is cheap to make, why would I want to invest into R&D, spend all that money creating something that upfront is going to cost me more money when I've got this very cheap product that I don't have to worry about? It becomes somebody else's business. It fills up our rivers, fills up our streets, not my problem. So those externalities aren't priced in. That's a huge problem in the current linear economic model. So the extended producer responsibility, it was on one of Mike's slides, is so critical to making sure that the polluter pays is basically what that's about, right? If you made it, you got to pay for it. You've got to get policy involved on that, because companies aren't going to choose to do that themselves. So the circular economy is a huge opportunity, but it does require certain things to be in its favor in order for that to happen. Plastic, cheap oil is a big problem. It's a big barrier to getting there. So
and our linear economy has actually taken about a good 50 or even 100 years to become as efficient as it is, right? But when we talk about circular economy, it's quite young still.
Exactly. The linear economy is very efficient. It's very good at what it was designed to do, but it never, ever considered the externalities and the outcomes of its system. And that's what we're now dealing with. That's the cost that we're now dealing with. So then the other issue is that consumers and consumption, that just even the name, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was really keen to move away from that and say, actually, we're users within a circular economy. We are users of these products. We are users of these services. And our consumption only exists in the kind of biological cycle, our consumption of food and biological materials where we can return the nutrients back to the earth. That is the consumption circle, but the technical circle where it's all our products, materials, all the clothes, the cars, the phones, all of that is actually, we're users in that. And let's think of ourselves as users rather than consumers, and take away that idea that we consume it and get rid of it. So there's a bit of a language thing there as well that we're trying to unpick and say, actually, we're people, we're citizens. If you consider who isn't a consumer, well, none of us, we're all consuming something. How do we separate that and start thinking about being users of things rather than consumers of things? On the waste management thing, innovation, I'm not a waste management expert, as in I don't really know the industry. But one of the things that comes to mind for me is that point about the gold and the fashion. When you've got more gold in a ton of mobile phones than in a ton of gold ore, what is the role of a waste management company in the future of urban mining? How do you create innovative partnerships with the manufacturers to say right up the front when they're designing these in the first place, how the waste management company can play a role in recapturing those resources, for example? I think the whole of there's an issue now where we need really, really good, effective waste management while we transition to a circular economy. But there's got to be an innovation piece here for waste management as well. What is your future? You've got all this wonderful technology, supply systems, you're connected with all these people and industry. What could be a new role for you in that future of a circular economy?
Right. Thanks very much, Nicola. Mike, anything to add on that?
Well, I think just to handle the existing waste, general waste per se, and industrial waste and things like that, those are some of the things that I think it's more than enough to handle. And if we want to look at raw material waste, for example, all materials, stones, whatnot, there's more to it rather than just IT. That is R&D in chemicals. Like for example, when we talk about water treatment, there are many ways to actually treat it. When I went to the third world countries 2 weeks ago, so basically the way that they define water treatment is just to add in water filter, just to trap out all the huge materials and small particles. So then that is considered water treatment. But what we're doing in Singapore is actually way beyond that. It's even safe for us to open our tap and just drink from it. The water is so clean, but you can't say about certain countries out there. So I think if we want to tackle the problem as a whole, we need to look at collaboration across countries. It is not one person, one company, one country. It's all the countries to come together and say, hey, we have such technology. Maybe we can collaborate together. We can pass some of this over to you. You can basically try it out and how to implement it. And then you have certain technologies and capabilities, and we should share all these things. That is where all the stakeholders can actually come about and do better good. I don't believe in solving 100% of the problem, but if we can address 80% of it, I think we're on pretty good course.
Right. Thanks very much, Mike. And sort of to pick on some of the points that you guys have raised there, that there's almost like a reimagination of the roles that different people could be playing within that economy. I mean, we're starting to see a lot more blurring of that traditional role, right? Like, for example, that example that Nicola was talking about, where gold manufacturers, or the ones that retain at least the mobile phones at the end, almost can have a new role in the mining of that gold, and therefore the gold miners almost have a different role to play in that economy itself. And vice versa, when you were talking about the water treatment and things like that, it's like, who is actually treating that water? How is it actually being kept clean? And all of that can actually, you start seeing a sort of like blurring in the traditional sort of segregation. Say, oh, that's not my problem anymore, and I just pass it on to somebody else. And I think that probably is a very sort of good juncture for me to ask one more question that was raised before this webinar even started. Is that given that it's not just waste management anymore, and although there's technologies in the waste management sector that's very important for us to actually understand where there are problems and where there are opportunities for us to do something differently to deliver those performances, what does it actually mean for people in other sectors of the economy? And are there any examples that we could use so that we could better understand what circular economy could look like? Mike, you want to go first, and then maybe Nicola? Mike?
Okay. So beyond just material side, we can look at service side as well. Like, for example, in the service part of the delivery, most of the time we look at, like, for example, I'm just giving an example. Let's say we order something online and then we have it delivered. To us, basically, that's something common. But do we actually question how was the goods actually delivered to us? How much travels does this material have? Where was it produced and how far has it traveled? Was it traveled in a very efficient way with less carbon emissions? Was it something that can be done better? It basically deals with service side. Another example is basically we talk about a bit controversial. We talk about EVs, electric vehicles. We say EV is cleaner, but have we asked about how is the treatment of the battery itself at the end of life? Where do you get the power, the electric to actually charge your vehicle? How was it actually produced? Does it come from incinerators? Does it come from carbon fuel, biofuel generators, or how was it produced? So all this basically has a different layers and perspective to it that we can look at beyond just material side.
And I'm really happy that you brought up the sort of controversial part of EVs, because I'm very excited to actually share that one of our approved community at the association, they've actually shared with us that they're starting to see like a complete different rethink of the ecosystem around EVs. Like, traditionally, it's a plug and play sort of situation, which means that you need a lot of space for cars to be parked in order to sit there for a good hour or so at least to be charged up before these EVs can continue. And of course, as you mentioned, those batteries itself has a big environmental impact on their own. So instead of trying to just make it better and therefore less waste, less impact, less whatever, there was actually, in China, we're starting to see a movement in the direction of battery swap and salt batteries as well, whereby instead of having cars actually needing to park up for a whole hour, you can drive up into somewhere, it exchanges the battery, which means those batteries can be charged off-site. And by doing that and then enhancing or changing completely the type of battery you use, instead of lithium ion, you're going into salt batteries, which has slightly lesser, well, not slightly lesser, actually quite a bit lesser environmental damages, while retaining a lot more battery charge. Then we're starting to say that with redesigning not just at the product level, which is like the plugs into the charging points, but actually looking at a whole system, how you're actually moving these batteries around, enabling EVs to perform what EVs are best supposed to do without necessarily burdening only that industry to solve all of its problems. So it's sort of like pairing together another part of that ecosystem. I say that, oh, actually, if we pair battery swap with battery design with the electric vehicle manufacturers, we can actually solve another layer of problem relating to, whether those lands are sort of kept in a sort of productive use, whether or not we can deal with those batteries, whether we can then have more control over the charging and without needing to pull all these long charging points across the grids and things like that, which then changes how much materials go into servicing that mobility performance that we actually need in cities. Nicola, anything? Yeah.
I just want to add one thing, because I think the EV one's a great example of where it can go wrong in terms of if we don't understand the circular economy fully, because the issue isn't about replacing a fossil fuel run car with an electric car that just produces less bad. The problem is, how do we move people? How do we get people moving to the places they need to go at the time they need to go in a way that's comfortable? And that's the kind of design thinking we need to apply to better urban design, better rural design. How do we get people moving? Because if all we're doing is material replacement, we're just going to end up with new problems like batteries, like heavier cars. They're very expensive to insure because they're expensive to repair. The tire wear is higher because they're heavier. There's a multitude of problems with EV. And not to mention the fact that actually, until you run your fossil fuel car till its death, it's actually more carbon efficient to stick with the car you've got than buy a new EV. So I just want to end on that note.
Right. And I think this might be a very good time as well, just to quickly share an example in relation to the regeneration piece, because I think very often when we talk about circular economy, we do tend to gear towards like material things like our phones, our laptops, our cars, our clothes, which are easier to imagine. But actually the regeneration piece is somewhat sort of missing from the conversation of circular economy today. Maybe one of the examples that I can share is about this group called Balbo Group, whereby they are actually one of, I think, the second largest organic sugar producer in the world. And what was amazing is that, typically you would think of mass plantations as something that degrades biodiversity, takes away water, degrades the soils. But just by changing how they actually approach the planting and of course the harvesting of all of this, Balbo Group was able to actually say that because we are there, we are planting something, the soil actually becomes healthier, or at least maintains that health, not what you see in typical plantations. And also the water table has recovered. We're seeing biodiversity able to move through our plantations instead, and we actually removed the need for chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides because the biodiversity has recovered in that area. And what Balbo Group is actually able to do, apart from just, harvesting the canes and then making the sugar, they actually open new revenue streams like selling organic ethanol and also providing power supply to inhabitants around their plants, which actually was like, there's the social benefit that came from a change in how they operate. There was an economic benefit that came for the company while also showing environmental benefit as well. And I think that's a really good sort of piece in when he's talking about regenerating. It's not just doing less bad, but really seeing how by being alive and operational, we actually can deliver so much more good by continuing our operations. Yeah, so Mike, anything to add on that? Or any last thoughts? We're reaching the end of the webinar now.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Right. Nicola, anything on your end then?
No, I'm conscious we're over, but I thought that was a lovely final thought. Thanks, Legion.
Great. So thanks very much, Nicola and Mike, for joining us in today's session. If you did like today's session, please feel free to leave us a good sort of evaluation. I'll be sending you guys out an evaluation form for the webinar. And I look forward to seeing you guys in our following activities as well. And if you do have any questions that have been unanswered, please feel free to write to us and we'll see if we can direct it to our respective speakers. With that, thank you very much for joining us in today's session. And I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.